So, just under 6 months ago, we launched a new initiative aimed at using project data to help improve the delivery of projects. We set out a number of objectives and issued a call to arms for like-minded individuals to roll their sleeves up and join us. We also promised to hold a public meeting within 6 months to give you a summary of progress to date. Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you to this update meeting. Thank you. So, as you can see on this slide, we'll be covering 5 separate areas, after which there should be plenty of time for Q&A. The 5 areas are welcome and recap on the task force vision. That's my part here. What's happening in project data analytics? A set of updates from the different work streams of the task force. Followed by a two-hander, really, that are linked but separate, if I can put it that way. A summary of a recently published report on the power of data, produced by Bentley Systems in collaboration with the Major Projects Association. And last but by no means least, a grand idea to set before you. And this will be followed by Q&A. If you could go to the next slide, please. In terms of a recap, as you can see on this slide, the white paper we launched at the meeting in September set out our stall. And this was a strong and strengthening belief that project performance, when measured against time, cost, scope, and benefits, is unacceptably low. And perhaps getting lower. Traditional approaches to codify best practices through lesson learned is just not working in this area. Data analytics, we believe, now has the power, and there are methods to inform project decisions and practice. But the world of projects has been slow to adopt, and there are issues here concerned with data access, data quality, data literacy, and really just understanding what data we have available to us these days and how we might best use them. So this white paper, cover of which is shown on the slide, set out a vision, quite an ambitious vision for a 10-fold improvement in project performance within 5 years, really just by adopting and applying the power of data analytics. It set out a roadmap based on a collaborative approach through a task force comprising 6 separate though related work streams. And if I can have the next slide, please. And these work streams are in the areas of engagement, data access, data quality, how we might develop solutions, what skills are needed going forwards, and also what areas of research are needed to allow and empower the other 5 work streams. You'll be getting updates on each of these work streams
because it keeps cutting in and out every time I'm speaking.
Minutes.
Cool.
We have some noises off. Hopefully they won't stay long. If you can put the next slide up, please. So who are the people involved in this? Well, Martin Paver of Projecting Success and myself, Tim Broyd from UCL, are very happy to be acting as co-chairs. And the next slide, please. And the main people working with us in the various areas, I won't read through all their names, but as you can see, names in each of those 6 work streams. And you can see from the bar at the bottom, just the types of organizations we have who are mainly involved in this. Certainly UCL, University of Oxford, Said Business School, the Major Projects Association, the Environment Agency, Sir Robert McAlpine, Petrofac, Jacobs, BAE Systems, Projecting Success, the University of Sheffield, and the Open Data Institute. So as I hope you'll see from that, this is very much a multi-sector of infrastructure initiative. We are certainly not linked to and founded in any one particular infrastructure sector, and we very much hope that that will continue. So I hope you enjoy this update, and I'll now pass over to Martin Paver to summarise progress over the last few months.
Thank you, Tim. I appreciate it. So in terms of progress, each of the work streams is going to be walking you through progress from their sort of community venture. So the thing that I'm going to walk you through now is about go on mute, please, everybody. Could you go mute and turn your videos off? I'll be very grateful indeed. Thank you. So what I'd like to do next is to walk you through some of the broader context associated with the Project Data Analytics quest and where we are at the moment. So next slide, please, Yoshi. So in terms of Project Data Analytics, we've been building the community since about 2017. And we're starting to see some companies who's really starting to get some traction. And this is breaking news. So Nplan have been working with the community since it first started. And Dev's been coming along to the community groups once a year and has just sponsored the recent hackathon as well. And we're really, really chuffed to see that Dev has got £10 million of funding for Nplan through an organisation called Google Ventures, or GV, which is part of Alphabet. On top of that, he's got another £6 million of funding as well from various other investors. So what this starts to demonstrate is that we've got some big investors now who really believe in the potential of Project Data Analytics. And these ideas are now starting to become a reality. We're aware of various other organisations out there who are starting to get some funding as well. And it demonstrates that by working together, that we can start to facilitate our shared vision to really transform how we can deliver projects. So it's some great news for Nplan. I'm confident that it won't be the last. I think there's lots of other organisations out there who's going to be pushing the boundaries. And next slide, please, Yoshi. So in terms of broader things that's going on, we've got the Data Advisory Group. So Traction's been building as part of that. And they're building up these two key products at the moment. So the first product is a report that I've been working on with Andy Murray and Gareth Parks, and it's about how to get started in Project Data Analytics. We're hoping to release that report in the next 2 to 3 months. In terms of the second piece of work that group's working on is a data maturity model, and that's in train at the moment, and that should be coming out probably in the next 3 to 4 months. In terms of Construction Data Trust, it's picking up momentum and it's really starting to get going now. So Construction Data Limited has now been incorporated. It's got an operational board. It's working in the interests of its members. Projecting Success are the data steward, and we're working in collaboration with Microsoft, and we're working up the technical architecture. We've got another 3 or 4 initiatives underway as well. So we're working with the Get It Right initiative, we're working with Be the Business, and we've got some other sort of irons in the fire as well, where we can bring people together and start to solve their problems through collaboration on data. Within the previous hackathon, so it just happened this weekend, we're starting to open up data on requests for information, drawing revisions, and we're pulling that data together for the greater good. And that's opening up these insights which previously would have been impossible. So the next step with the Construction Data Trust is to formulate it and to drive it beyond an MVP. The next slide, please, Yoshi. So it's worth taking account of the broader context as well. So a load of reports have been published recently which mention project data, and they're all pointing in the right direction. And what we'd like to do next is to start to engage with these groups to shape what we can do to embed project data analytics into the heart of project delivery. And what we also need to do is we need to put some of these concepts into practice. And Highways England have been leading the way inside of government at the moment, and there's so much more that we could do. We've reached out to the Public Accounts Committee as well, and we've received a very positive response, and I think watch this space. We're looking forward to broader engagement in the coming months. And next slide, Yoshi. So in terms of Project Hack, we had about 106 people turned up for the weekend, and it's a big community hackathon, and it's there to inspire people, upskill people, and start to develop some capabilities in project data analytics. So what this does, it brings lots of different communities together and different sectors, and we start to create solutions. Each of those solutions can then be open sourced, and we can put those out there for the greater good of everybody. In due course, we'll be working with the NHS and the Environment Agency, so we'll be taking this beyond construction, and we'll get more and more challenges involved. And I think it's looking like a fantastic platform where we can start to pool data and start to solve problems for the benefit of everybody. Next slide, please, Yoshi. So what we're looking to do is to get a community platform launched on the 29th of March. And as part of that platform, we'll have forms in there to share ideas and code. In April, we'll be expanding it out to a solution center as well, where we start to host community-driven solutions. In terms of those solutions, we'll be productionizing the outputs from the hackathon and putting those in there. And there's organizations like Petrifac and Wood Group who said to us that they will put some code in as well as some dashboards in there, so we can start to build up this library now of loads of artifacts for the greater good. And it saves you sort of developing themselves, and you can fork them. And what we start to do then is move a lot quicker together than working alone. So that's the aspiration, and that's what's happening at the moment across project data analytics.
Thank you, Martin. We now then move on to a series of 5-minute summaries of activity in each of the 6 work streams I flagged up earlier. We're going to be starting with engagement, and Andy Murray of the MPA will be talking to that. And then as at the end of each of those fairly brief summaries, the speaker will pass on to the summarizer for the next work stream. Are you there, Andy?
I am. So thank you very much, Tim. So on the engagement work stream, the white paper back in September set out a vision and objectives for the task force, with the engagement work stream specifically providing, if you like, a driving force to enable them. Specifically, the work stream has been tasked with developing a vision, setting out some blueprints of the capabilities we need across all of the work streams, roadmaps to development, focusing on community engagement, sharing good practice and inspiring others. So that's what we have set out to achieve. As you can see, there's a lot of activity going on in project data analytics, and that's through the government, the various entities of government, industry bodies, professional institutions, and academia. And very little of that we found to be coordinated, and there's a danger of duplication and factions emerging. I think someone's microphone's still on. Great, thank you. So the task force seeks alignment and coordination across such initiatives and groups, and we have a strategy based on collaboration and partnering rather than reinventing things. So therefore, our engagement workstream follows a traditional stakeholder engagement model of awareness, interest, engagement and commitment. The focus to date has been principally in the awareness step, and that is for the task force to be aware of what's going on in relation to project data analytics and by whom. We've been busy reaching out to organisations, but we've had to prioritise our efforts to those that we reach out to where we can get some early agreement and early cooperation so that we start that alignment approach that I mentioned earlier. So we've also focused on the awareness step in terms of who needs to be aware of the task force, why, and how they can be engaged. And we did that through seeking volunteers to get involved in the various work streams. We've discovered through this engagement approach, in particular the awareness step, that there's a lot of misunderstanding in relation to project data analytics, particularly around digital transformation and aspects such as machine learning and AI. So as mentioned by Martin earlier, we've been working with the APM to develop a Getting Started guide, and that covers both the tactical approach to getting started and also the more strategic approach that some organizations may need to take. The guide's been drafted and it's in the queue at the moment to go through APM's publishing process. Next slide, please, Joshi. So this slide sets out activities that are currently underway and also planned for the next 6 months. So I'm not going to go through this in detail. You'll be pleased to know, given we've only got a few minutes each on our workstream updates. But what I'd like to do is just to go from right to left to sort of show what our end point thinking is. So the task force is made up of volunteers, which is great, but there will come a point where activities we want to pursue cannot be done by volunteers alone. You know, we may need some dedicated resource, whether by way of secondment or hiring, and we're also very likely to need investment in capabilities to support each of the work streams. For example, you know, a solutions database or some competency frameworks or whatever that might need come from the work streams. So the engagement work stream is also aiming at securing some funding. Now, in order to secure funding, we need governance. And so you can see the steps outlined that we're putting in place to make sure we've got the appropriate governance in place with the right people appointed to a steering group, and we'll only go out and seek funding, you know, once that governance is in place. You can also see some of the other aspects through the people and organisations and the content and comms that go to support the governance and funding activities too. So one thing I would like just to highlight on here, I mentioned before about volunteers, and you can see in the people and organisation aspect there's some outreach and volunteers activity, and you can see that sort of we've highlighted it as amber. And the reason for that is that from our first launch back in September, we were sort of overwhelmed with volunteers, which is really good. But the need to focus on some of our foundation steps means that not all volunteers have been engaged, I guess, as fully as they may have liked when they first put their hands up. Please be patient. You know, we are you know, moving on to the next step on most of our initiatives, so there'll be plenty of opportunities for everyone to get involved. That's all I'd like to cover in terms of this engagement workstream update. So I'm going to hand over to Sue, who's going to take you through skills.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Andy. So building on what Andy has just explained there, from a skills perspective, we've clearly recognised that the acceleration around digital transformation across organisations is changing the way that we work, not just in what we do, but how we do it. Through the discussions and the workshops that we've been having to date with the skills working group, we've recognised that actually we need to understand the current landscape of project data analytics skills from both an individual perspective and also from an organisation. We collectively recognise from our own organisations or those that we work with, such as the customers, our suppliers, our partners, our training organisations, that the focus on data and digitisation has given rise to major transformation programmes across all sectors and industries. And so in recognising this, the skills workstream want to effectively engage and listen to the heartbeat, as we've classified it, of the current organisational environment. And we're aiming to conduct a survey across a broad section of the organisations in the UK, as well as through the community through Martin. In doing that survey, what we're hoping to achieve is gaining that insight, not just from an individual perspective on their roles and the impact of project and data and analytics to them, but also to understand the activities that are happening across small, medium and large organisations and how they are currently addressing the challenges of project data analytics and the future environment that we're all working towards. In doing that, we're hoping through that sense making, that's going to give us a better understanding of the requirements and the developments that are needed for this project data and analytics framework. The aspiration is that from this informed view that we're going to get from a broad section of industry organisations, that actually we can start to bring some alignment together, which complements and kind of collaborates with the existing initiatives that are already happening across the organisations. And we can then achieve a framework which effectively can be adopted by this broad section of cross-industry, cross-sector, small, medium, large enterprises, that really enables them to look at how they improve their capability in project data and analytics. I'm absolutely a strong believer that no one currently has the silver bullet in this space, whether that's an individual or an organisation. And it's only through the fact that, you know, we are going to collaborate, as Andy spoke about before, and work together in aligning some of our approaches, that we can actually achieve the goal of, you know, improving our project and programme performance and delivering successfully. My ask is, if anybody's wanting to kind of get involved in the skills work stream, then please reach out and get in touch. You know, it is an interesting space. Everybody is talking about the skills for the future now from a project data and analytics perspective. So it really is kind of a fundamental part of the direction we need to take a lot of organisations. In building the framework, what we've recognised is that we need to enable both individuals and organisations to assess where they are in terms of their capability, and to be able to enable them to do that gap analysis, which then they can start to think about their route to how they are going to fill that gap, understanding the learning and development that they need to bring in to their organisations, and also where the learning and development community effectively need to start thinking about how they adapt their deliverables to meet the requirements that we are going to be framing. We've recognised, though, that this framework, this skills framework, needs to effectively sit across what is probably a very, very broad spectrum of industry, both from size, scale, complexity, the types of projects and the environments that we all work in, the customers that we have. And so when we think about that, you know, that flexibility, what we've also got to think about, and what we're absolutely keen on, is making sure that the framework is also has a high level of practicality to it, that any organisation can adopt for implementation. The other aspect that we've recognised through the skills framework and through the thinking that's happened so far is that we need to make sure that the requirement for enhanced data skills, you know, is recognised across all professions, and that it's also recognised through lots and lots of different roles within our organisations. And therefore, from whether you think about a role as being a subject matter expert, to somebody who's more of a generalist in data and analytics, to your project control specialists, then really what we're talking about doing is making sure that we have a role-based approach to how we improve our data culture, our data literacy, and our data skills. So in terms of where we are for the future, we are obviously working our current plan, and if you can go down, Yoshi, please, to the next slide. What we are looking to do is effectively create now the framework through the activities that we're going to start commencing delivery on soon. And we've got a bit of work to do yet in terms of putting a little bit more meat on the bone or skin on the fish. We're not kind of sure which way to term this. But what we are looking at doing is creating now owners for each of these strands effectively of activity that we can then start to mobilise against. So that's a bit of the update from the skills work stream. I'll now hand over to Martin.
Thank you, Sue. Appreciate that. And I like the skin on the fish. Excellent. Brilliant stuff. Right. I'm going to talk to you about data structure. So we're recrafting this. Now, it's not going to be called data quality in the future. It's going to be called data structure. So what we'd like to do in terms of data structure is to explore what we can do to ensure that our data is fully aligned to the problems that we're trying to solve in the future. And those problems in the future are going to be different to those problems we're solving today, because if we can start to predict some of this stuff in the future, then we've got more predictive questions that we're going to be asking. So what we're trying to do conceptually is to get everybody sort of working to an agreed set of data standards and definitions, but that is unrealistic, and we know that. So in terms of the aspirations, how far can we push it? And I think that's a question that we're trying to ask the work stream. So what can we do to bring some commonality? So what we need to do as well is we need to be integrating data right across the supply chain. So it's not just inside of an organization, it's looking end to end. And that's where the magic starts to happen. If we collectively want to leverage data on risk, we need a lot of data. But the problem is everybody manages risk slightly differently. We all describe risk differently. We don't always track it through into issues, and we don't always understand the cost impact of those risks materializing. If we can start to look at this and start to change some of our approaches so we can sort of close down that gap, that's where we can then start to do some really cool analytics. So data structure, so it's not just about data quality, it's about data structure and the way we join data together. And in terms of data, it's looking at its completeness, it's looking at the taxonomies as well. So data structure itself could be quite a dry topic. The problem is, if we don't address this topic, we're going to struggle to start to integrate some of this data. So that data will remain siloed, and we won't have the data volumes to drive the high-end insights. So the starting point to drive this forward is to create the case for change. So what is the business case to invest effort in driving this improvement? But the problem is we can't launch into the business case until we're able to characterize where we are today. So what we're going to be doing is to conduct a survey whilst in parallel driving forward a data audit. So what that data audit is going to do, it's going to take some of the data that has been put into the hackathon, and we'll assess the compliance between that data and the problem statements that we're trying to answer. So what we're going to try and do is to use those insights to then characterize and evidence the case for change. So those are our immediate priorities. As we start to grow this understanding, we'll be reaching out to understand what other work is in train and what we need to do to align our work to those aligned sort of initiatives. And there's things going on in places like the Centre for Digital Built Britain, etc. Once we've done that, they can then move into the detail, and that's the detail of taxonomies, ontologies, and data dictionaries. All of those collectively enable us to structure our data. Once we've done that, we can then develop the methodology to assure data including developing some hack challenges so we can start to automate some of these assurance activities. And that starts to provide forensic insights then and enables us to assess in real time the completeness and the accuracy of some of our data. It's a very big and bold vision, and it's got an iterative approach, so please get involved. And in terms of this work stream, we could do with some more horsepower as well, so please reach out, and if you'd like to get involved, please contact me. So if I could close, and I'll pass over to Grant. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. So the task force vision of improved project delivery enabled by project data requires us to improve data access to the growing community of practice. The data access workstream is aiming to demystify some of the perceived complexities of data sharing and to help organisations progress this agenda. And while I remember, a quick thank you to the workstream volunteers from Heathrow, the Oakland Group, PCSG and colleagues at Sir Robin McAlpine. The first objective we set ourselves was to define the data access challenges, what's getting in the way. We're aiming to create some guidance for data holding organisations presented in a structured way that will enable them to build robust business cases for sharing their data with other organisations. We identified that people face challenges that are both cultural and technical as they embark on this journey. And the things we've identified so far can be grouped into 3 themes, each represented here as a hurdle to overcome towards becoming data confident. These themes surely won't be considered in isolation or in a sequence as I show in the slide here, but are more likely to be developed and matured concurrently. Clearly, there will be no single defined status at which every organisation will have ticked all the boxes for data sharing. It's likely there'll be some level of certainty will be achieved against each theme, which will enable an organisation to move forward, recognising an element of residual risk, but that risk is acceptable when compared to the potential value that can be realised from the exercise. So we're aiming to structure our guidance around these 3 themes. Firstly, willingness, and this is about the business case, recognising that it's a greater benefit to be sharing than not. Second one is confidence, and this is about trusting the journey and the process, understanding that quality is likely to be low to start with, but listen, that's okay, because together we're going to get better quicker than, or better, together we'll get better quicker than doing it alone. And that of course links back to business case. And the third one is ability, which is learning from doing and steadily ensuring that our people, our projects and our organisations are able to facilitate more access to data. This of course creates a bit of a virtuous circle of more willingness, more confidence and more ability, and you keep lapping around in more of the same hurdles. We recognise that people are already doing this at different levels, so what we're aiming to do is to bring some structure as to how this happens. On the next slide, you'll see our work plan. It looks like this. Thank you. We've identified 6 activity threads within the workstream. Number 1 is the business case, and this is the why we should be sharing data and relates closely to the work that Andy's already outlined on the engagement workstream. Number 2, landscape. This is the what. Well, we're considering the current landscape, what's happening in other countries, UK government direction on data, and what different industries are doing. And the task force is providing access to lots of different examples across the UK landscape. Our third work stream is framework, and this is the crux of what we're aiming to do. This is the how. We're going to produce a framework which currently takes the form of a fairly simple checklist, which will guide an organisation through the key considerations on each of our themes. We're aiming to share best practice and case studies from others who've already encountered some of the challenges, and we'll share in ways in which these have been overcome by those organisations. During development of the framework, we're aiming to test our assumptions, which is 4 on this chart, and we'll do that more widely by engaging with this community and with your networks. So if you think you'd like to participate in that engagement, then please do let us know. We're aiming to complete this initial work in sort of early summer this year with the publication of our first data access report. We'll supplement that with a follow-up in the autumn when we expect to be able to refine the framework with broader input and more case studies. And we plan to develop the framework to become a web-based tool, which means it can be easily accessible by everyone, and we can use data gathered from that web-based tool to inform and improve the framework. Finally, the last 2 activities in this diagram relate to promotion of the framework and development of a long-term vision and strategy. We already have a vision of our success as a work stream, and that's when our other task force colleagues and the wider community no longer experience any challenges to data access. But clearly, we've got a bit of a journey to go on to get there. So that's the update from the data access work stream. And now I'd like to hand over to Alex, who will talk you through solutions development.
Thanks, Grant. And yeah, welcome to the solutions development workstream overview. It is what it says on the tin, and it's the workstream that really pulls everything together to give people hopefully tangible solutions to tangible problems. One of the biggest points in this is that not everyone has the answers to all the problems. In fact, not everyone understands what the problems are. And what we hope to be able to do is not just provide solutions, but also inspire you as individuals to take potential solutions back to your organizations and say, look at what's possible. And so part of that is about understanding what the requirements are. So what sort of things are we needing to do in order to solve problems? What does that look like? How does it shape? How big is that problem? And we're all coming at it from different perspectives, and it'll all be subtly different, which is why all our previous speakers are working towards making sure that we're doing this in a consistent manner as possible. But at the end of the day, what we want to do is provide some insight and inspiration to provide solutions. Now, as part of the fact that not everyone knows everything, what we also need to understand is that, you know, these solutions in projects are very typically common across all of the life cycles of a project, all of the functional areas of a project. And what we don't want to do is for you guys all to go and individually create an HSE dashboard or an emissions dashboard or whatever it happens to be that the tool of choice needs to be. What we want to do is provide inspiration of one example, and hopefully one that you can just plug in and work, but maybe not as easy as that, but to give you something absolutely tangible that you can take away and use that. So how are we going to do that? Well, first of all is, what are the requirements? Secondly is, what use case do you have? What is the challenge? What is the problem statement that you have? And what we need to do is gather that in, collect that, and we need to map that together. And then once we formulate those challenges, we then need to look at, well, how do we solve them as a proof of concept? How do we take them forward as an MVP? And that's where we've got the solutions work stream. It's pulling forward ideas into the hacks that Martin mentioned earlier. So hack 8 was completed over the weekend there. And that provides the inspiration. That provides some ideas, some challenges, some inspiration as to what solutions are going to be available. And that's a feeder, and we need that hopper of ideas coming towards us to provide hoppers of solutions that you guys can take away. But the question is then, how do you actually get access to that? Who gets access to that? Should it be completely open source, or should it be slightly restricted? And Martin mentioned there about a marketplace. So what we're looking to do is have a central repository where people can dip in and get access to potential solutions to apps. So a common area for solutions, common solutions that we all need for common problems. You know, and you know, we all got to prioritize these things. So how do you prioritize this? How big is the problem? And it starts to become very, very complicated. And what were you going to use? If I can ask Ryoshi to jump to the next slide, is and distilling it down into some simple messages is, we need the challenges from the community, from you. The more challenges we have from you, the more we know which challenges to solve, because they're the most important ones, because most people are asking for them. And then what we can do is we can map all of these challenges, all the potential solutions, all the requirements, all the user stories into a knowledge graph. And there's a nice little pretty image there of what a knowledge graph output looks like. And the projecting success team are populating a knowledge graph to map this landscape. And for those of you that haven't seen this before, I suggest you have Google Neo4j, Neo4j, and have a look at what that does. And it allows you to look at problems and potential solutions from completely different perspectives. Really clever way to open up the mind as to what linkages exist between different problems and solutions. And is a very powerful tool to make sure that we don't miss things, and allows us to prioritize where our efforts should be spent. What we're underpinning, what underpins our solutions is typically the usual off-the-shelf platforms. We heavily use Microsoft products. You can see there the solutions designed image there about the Power Apps, Power Automate. So typically, you know, things that most organizations have to hand, most people have to hand, if they're willing to spend a little bit of money to get this on board. And what we end up doing then is having a bank of apps in the marketplace. The visual here it was done in Hack 8 at the weekend, an emissions reporting piece, which is now freely available, and allows us to basically take our expenses from our ERP systems that we all have. We all got to fill in an expense form, and out of that expense form, one of the expenses we put in is vehicle emissions, travel receipts, all that type of things. And what this now starts to do is it now starts to automatically calculate the CO2 emissions as a result of the project's travel. Now, what that then allows you to do is think, well, should I really be traveling? It allows you to ask personal questions of yourself. It allows you to ask questions of your organization as to how much is appropriate. And that has a whole bunch of regulatory reporting requirements that are going forward, and fits in nicely with the COP26 climate change conference in Glasgow later on this year. So big wide picture, but what we're asking from you is get involved. Let us know your challenges. Let us know the sort of dashboards that you're working on, the sort of automations that you'd like to see solved. Get involved, put some ideas forward. Nothing's a silly idea. We've all got the same problems. Get involved, put these forward to us, and we'll look to prioritize them and look to see if we can solve some challenges for you. And that concludes my part. I'm going to pass you on to Joe in research now. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Alex. That's great. And Yoshi, thank you. You've already gone on to the next slide. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, all. My name's Jo Jolly, and I've got the real privilege of working with Dr. Ron Dyer from Sheffield University and Breda Ryan, a Director of Programme Controls at Jacobs, in leading the research workstream. And it's great that already in this space, we have representatives from the public sector, the private sector and research. And Ron and Breda have to send their apologies today, I'm afraid. But as I say, it's a real privilege to work with such collaborative and inclusive people. And also, more recently, we've been contacting our volunteers to start to get involved in our research workstream, and a huge thanks to them. And as I talk about how our work is developing, I really hope that some people today might feel interested to get involved with our workstream as well. Clearly, it's the best one, but yeah, I'm biased. So if we move on to the next slide, please, Yoshi. The problem that we were asked to look at, really, or that we recognised needed looking at for the research workstream, and it came as a real surprise to me. I don't have a background in project data analytics. My background is in project delivery. And so it came as a real surprise to me that there actually doesn't really exist a clear picture of all the research activities that have taken place, are taking place across this field, and that there isn't a really good sort of horizon scanning forward look around what might be emerging. And so that's really our problem. And so the task force, our task force, has a fantastic role to play in really filling that gap. And the thing that makes me feel really motivated to work in this space as well is the values of our task force. And the first slide said about how we work in the interest of the collective, and that's absolutely what runs through our values, and it's so important, and it's something that I strongly believe in. So the focus of our work stream is really in establishing some of these sort of core foundations. So we're starting with an exploration around project data analytics. And by that, we are meaning predictive analytics, artificial intelligence, and the application of machine learning. It's then identifying those activities and disseminating it, making it available, and again, sharing it, helping others to get access to it, to embed it more quickly, so that as a community, as a profession, we can develop and learn and improve at the fastest rate that we can. And then also to keep that view on the future, the horizon scanning, what is coming up, and even how do we influence that? How do we influence that so that some of the emerging research topics are really focused on some of the things, indeed, that Alex was just referring to in the solutions development work stream. So this is, if we go on to the next slide, please, Yoshi. This is an exciting day for us in many ways, because after today, we will be putting out a call to action across our community, sending it to all of you, to ask for your feedback, to capture your knowledge. For the first time, we'll be capturing the knowledge across our community around the research activities that have and are taking place, and also that the horizon scanning, the future look, and where do you feel we should be focusing our efforts as a community. That call to action is going out after today. There's then a 1 month return on that request, and then after a month we'll be pulling that information together and really starting to develop this baseline, this information, this data set that again everybody can access and see. And also for the year ahead, as a work stream, we want to be shaping what are the 1 or 2 or 3 things that we will focus on in the research field that will move us that step forward. And we're very much focused on doing a few things well and doing it collaboratively, again, for the greater good. So that's us up to date. If anybody's interested in getting involved, we'd absolutely love to hear from you. So please do. And on that note, I will hand back to Tim to introduce the next topic, which is a subject very close to all of our hearts. So thank you, Tim, and thank you all.
Thank you, Joe. And indeed, thank you to all of our speakers giving updates on the different work streams. Just a couple of things before we move on. One is that, as you'll have seen, there are some fairly complicated diagrams shown on the work streams in the fishbone graphs, etc. All of these slides will be made available at the end of this meeting. Just where they'll be, I'll be telling you right at the end. There are also, you will have heard, a number of requests for involvement, certainly opportunities for involvement from the speakers. How you can get involved, again, I'll mention just before the end of the meeting. So thanks for that. I'm now going to pass back to Andy Murray, who will give us a summary of a recent report entitled Power of Data, which has recently been published jointly by the MPA and Bentley Systems. And then that will lead on to a grand idea, and I'll let Andy pass straight on to Donnie McNichol after he's told us about the recent report. So once again, Andy, I hope you're there, and I am. Yes, hear from you.
Thank you, Tim. So before I introduce the report, I would first like to thank members of the Major Projects Association who participated in the study, and of course Bentley Systems for their expert analysis and conclusions and for producing the resultant report, and in particular Mark Coates, who led on that activity. Mark is hoping to join us for the Q&A session later, so he'll be available to answer any questions in relation to the report that I'm unable to. If I could have the next slide, please, Joshi. So this report brings together two of the most important topics facing the world of major projects today. So that's the role of major projects in delivering sustainability goals and the massive opportunity offered through data analytics to radically improve project performance. So neither are easy. Firstly, major projects are inherently carbon intensive, and secondly, the data required for effective analytics is not easily obtained. As we've heard, sort of major projects span multiple organisations, each with their own individual objectives and separate data strategies. So that's why these two topics featured recently in annual conferences held by the Major Projects Association's members, and why we established working groups, and also why we support the study, and in particular why we support the task force. Next slide, please, Yoshi. So just want to provide a bit of context. So ahead of the World Economic Forum's 50th annual meeting in Davos last year, there was around 800 or so global experts and decision makers, and they named inaction on climate change and extreme weather as the greatest long-term threats to the world economy. But despite numerous sort of world conferences and agreements, that still remains true today. So the first international agreement, if we sort of trace back, goes to Rio in '92, and then we've had sort of annual conferences almost every year since then, called COPs, or Conference of the Parties, and they resulted in sort of further significant agreements, the most notable ones being Kyoto in '97 and Paris in 2015, and the latter one set out targets for decarbonisation. So just to highlight how seriously national governments are taking the issue of decarbonisation, there are now at least 9 countries who have set legally binding targets to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, including the UK. The UK has additionally planned to cut carbon emissions by 68% by 2030, so bringing some of those targets forward further still. And after the inauguration, Joe Biden, who's gone back to sticking with the Paris Agreement, has said that they're looking to achieve net zero by 2032. And China, the world's second largest economy, is now saying 2060. So what's that got to do with projects? Well, the urgency which drive these targets, and particularly the set out in Paris and subsequent sort of ambitious goals by national governments, means they cannot be met by incremental changes alone. They need step changes and transformation, and that's of our infrastructure, of our systems, dare I say, of our society. So we need projects to deliver those step changes and transformation. However, projects, and in particular infrastructure projects, are inherently carbon intensive, and indeed cement is the second most used substance on the planet after water. And I've read somewhere something like it would be the third, if it was a nation, it would be the third most polluting nation on its own. So we need to change our approach to projects. And our study also found there's an intersect between the world of projects and environmental sustainability and corporate governance, or ESGs. And traditionally, these ESG objectives have been set to reduce the negative impact of an organisation's activities. But to deliver the sort of step changes we're talking about, these sort of transformational change, the new generation of ESG objectives are seeking to do much more than that, and they're looking to change the behaviour of the organisation's entire value chain, including sort of financial vehicles that incentivise change and monitor impacts. The study found numerous examples of this. Close to home, Network Rail's recent ESG objectives make it the first railway organisation anywhere in the world to commit to cutting emissions to the extent of limiting global warming by 1.5 degrees, and that's through its own activities, and importantly through the activities of its supply chain. So putting requirements, science-based requirements, on organisations that will work with it. So on the financing of projects, the study also highlights its importance, citing the former governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, and he had an initiative called COP26 Private Finance Agenda, which he set out last year, which was meant to be ahead of COP26 taking place, that was deferred to November of this year. And indeed, the Chancellor of the UK also set out finance as a critical enabler of net zero goals, highlighting this when he launched the UK's first green gilts. So next slide, please, Yoshi. So moving on from that wider context, then sort of focusing in on projects. So the study showed that of the 100 or so organisations that were consulted, that data was a key concern, and that's both in terms of understanding the project's carbon usage and carbon impacts, and also on improving their performance. And as you can see here, sort of 82% had either deployed or in the process of deploying digital workflows across their projects, but of those, sort of 63% of them said that they were using 4 or more separate systems, and only 36% of them had a sort of a connected data environment. Now, just to put that, that's within an enterprise. So if we sort of look further outside of that enterprise, data flows across multiple organizations working on major projects becomes even more disjointed and siloed, and that came out through the study. So the report shows an aspiration for major projects to shift from being sort of part of the problem, particularly in relation to cement, to being a key piece of the solution to addressing climate change and the nature emergency as well. And this report also shows that whilst progress is being made, the world of major projects is struggling to tackle barriers preventing data analytics being adopted at pace and to its full potential. So very much aligning to the vision set out in the task force last September. So to overcome the barriers, we need to transition from being a sort of what we call a passive adopter of data analytics, and that's typically characterized by the use of sort of general business applications, to more active pursuit of data analytics, specifically for major projects. And some examples of those have been highlighted in the report. So to seize this opportunity provided by data analytics to improve the sustainability of project delivery and their outcomes, we need collective leadership, and also we need an open data environment. So 2 of the core objectives that were set out in the Project Data Analytics Task Force white paper last year. So the urgency we face means the world of projects needs to step up and deliver big improvements soon. And that's the gauntlet that's been thrown down. And on this note, I'm going to hand over to Donny.
Hi, Andy. Thank you. Just a very small point. I will say next all the way through rather than saying next slide, please, Yoshi. So I'm not meaning to be rude, but Yoshi's quite happy with that. So Yoshi, next. Andy has laid down the basis for the problem, and what we've done is we've thought, well, what can the Data Analytics Task Force do about it? What can we do to make a difference in achieving net zero? Next. So our proposal is to use our collective superpowers, which I think the projects world and the people involved in data and data analytics have, to more effectively alleviate climate change. So it's something that we've now picked up and we're now looking at. Next. So the specific questions we'd like to talk about are, as professionals, what can we do in our own sphere of influence? So this is not from top down, this is not from middle down, this is from the bottom level up. What can you do as a project manager? You could be a head of projects, you could be a data analyst, you could be anyone involved in the change world. What can you do within your world? Next. How well are we doing and what can be done to make the biggest impact? So what is it that you could be doing more of? If you're given some information about where you sit in relation to other people, what changes would you make personally? Next. And what impact are the myriad of strategies around policies that exist? Andy has touched on a number of the things at a very strategic level that do exist, initiatives, policies, and so on, but what actual impact are they having on the ground? And we'll come to that as well. Individually and collectively, we believe that we have the answer. That's why something like a task force is set up, is to bring together collective energies of a number of people, the expertise and intellect. And we want to support you to make a difference. So this is not an initiative that is geared at a few, this is geared at the many. So next. So the first phase of what we'd like to do in advance of COP26, which is happening in November this year, is the basis of it is to stimulate and motivate you. The basis of that is a carbon a carbon self-evaluation. So it is a structure that will provide you with the information, will challenge you to think about within your own professional world, what is it that you are doing? So it may cover questions like when justifying a project, is carbon taken into account? Is data collected on carbon as part of it, and is it reported on? What guidance support is provided in carbon? But we want to do it in a way that will stimulate and motivate you to look at changing your own behaviour and that possibly of your peers around you. We want to capture and share the wisdom that will also come. So we're going to be asking you about what are you actually doing apart from just answering this self-evaluation. We'll actually be asking people, what are you doing that you would class as good practice? What are you proud of? What do you think are the key areas that need to change? Next. And empower you through information. So the idea is to give you a report back. So it will be an online self-evaluation, and from that we can give you some insight about where you are, and also empower you with some additional information and point you at things. You may want to consider this, you may want to look at that. Next. And as Andy has touched on, we want to use this to then prioritise the task force work streams. So where are the areas that we think need most work given the feedback that we're receiving? So it becomes a virtuous circle about the more information we get, the more geared we can, the more focus we can put in particular work streams. Next. So that is at a personal level, but with your support, we think we can actually impact the professions and also the sectors that we work in and you work in. Next. So leading up to and following COP26, because I must stress this is not just for the next few months, this is a long-term initiative as we see it, we think we can actually inform the profession. So the data that will come from the carbon self-evaluation will give us insights as to what is and isn't working, and where particular hot spots or cold spots from each of the areas that we ask people about, and we can put that to the profession and say, should we not be doing something about this? Next. We believe that we can challenge the actual decision makers themselves, because this data will inform us as to what impact is happening on the ground from the strategies, initiatives, policies and so on that have been developed. So we can take that up to governmental level, to professional body level, and say you may have a policy of this, or you may have a strategy on that, but that is not impacting people on the ground. How can we make that more effective and do that? And next. And the idea is from all of this and from all the interaction, which I'll just touch on in a moment, we want to actually develop data-driven solutions. Now, Alex touched on that earlier about the things that can be created and provided to the profession that will help people to deal with a myriad of challenges that come from around climate change. Next. So how can you play a part? Next. You can provide your immediate feedback in the chat during the Q&A. So at the moment, if you would like to, until the end of the call, we would love to know what your absolute immediate thoughts are in hearing this presentation and what the task force is looking to focus on. So that's the first thing, and of course you can put more thoughtful feedback later on as part of in the general feedback. Next, you can volunteer. As Andy said earlier, we do have an email address that is being looked at, and if you could put in there the grand idea or carbon or something similar in the title, if that's your particular area of interest and where you would really like to focus. Next, you can get involved and use your energy and superpowers. And I'll just, if you flick through the next few, Yoshi, just to give you an idea, we're going to help prioritise the work streams, get involved with the work streams, but also there are the hacks that Martin mentioned right at the very start. There are meetups and events. All of these, some of these images you may notice are when people used to be able to meet. All the virtual versions of these that are running at the moment, and there is intention to run a hack shortly on particularly climate change And from that, as you will have seen in any of the hacks, they aim to form and create solutions. Using the data, we will take it to project meetups and so on. So there's a whole series of things. We're not intending to do this on our own, and we do hope to involve other professional bodies and groups to develop the carbon self-evaluation, to distribute it, and also to analyse and benefit from the data and share it and make a difference. So thank you.
Superb, thanks, Donny. Now we've got 15 minutes, perhaps 20 minutes or so of Q&A for the audience to sort of having reflected back on what you've heard, and ask any questions to any of the speakers and task force members. We've got a question that's come in the chat so far already from Tim Podesta. So I guess this is probably one for Alex in the first instance, but then I might well come to a couple of others who've been around the hackathons for a little bit longer. Alex, what would you say is the top user story or top app that's kind of come out recently from the hackathons, I guess, that the task force is able to celebrate?
So I think we're on a journey. There are a lot out there, and Martin and the group and the Projecting Success YouTube site hosts a huge range of solutions out there. For me, the biggest thing that excites me, and it should excite anyone that's got a construction side of their day-to-day job, it's about predicting safety events. And the concept about what data can be soft predictors of a higher risk on a project on one day than another day. And I think, if you think about what that might be, I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that we typically do in safety that looks over our shoulder. But what we also have is training and competency records, absence records. We've got the number of tasks happening at any one site. We've got the busyness of a schedule. We've got the type of activity, the type of tradespeople. There are so many soft factors that influence the likelihood of a safety event that we already record and capture within our organizations. Coupling that with weather conditions, the social calendar, festive calendar. And actually, when was last night the Champions League final played? Have people been on the pop the night before? All of these factors influence an ability to predict an event on safety. So for me, that's probably the most important one for myself. The more that we can do in that space to more accurately predict and prevent a safety incident, for me, that's the most powerful thing that we can do in this community. Not quite an answer to your question. I would recommend that you go into Martin Projecting Success's YouTube site. A huge range of solutions there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Alex. And I think, that's certainly for us where our journey started at Sir Robert McAlpine was that same recognition around safety. And then, as you've so eloquently described, you get so many, there are so many factors that tie into it. And of course, if you're collecting the data for those factors, then you can start to see the knock-on effects of other areas of project delivery, be it the program or be it cost. And so you do build a much greater picture of what's happening on the project and then how to influence it. Did anyone else want to chime in with a particular sort of solution that they'd seen, or should we move on to the next question? I'm not seeing any hands or any nods from the group. So we've had another question from Ezra, which is Ezra says it's great to be able to reduce carbon emissions during project delivery. How about accountability while operating whatever the output of the project is? Perhaps on that one, if I come to Martin and Andy, what are your thoughts around that?
Shall I go first, Martin?
Yeah, Martin. I think Martin's flashing on and off.
Yes,
so
yeah.
So it's a really good question. I actually see there's three aspects to carbon in relation to projects. So the first one is, as Ezra sort of pointed out, is the sort of reducing carbon in the project. So how do we design project activities to consume less carbon in order to produce the project's product? And then there's the carbon performance of the project's product, so the asset or infrastructure or whatever it is that's been delivered. And I actually also see a third one around projects where the very purpose of the project is in relation to carbon reduction. So things like carbon capture and storage, batteries, and hydrogen networks, circular economy concepts. And the third one's really interesting because that's sort of shifting our thinking more from an individual project or asset to thinking of more of those systems. And indeed, if you see the NAO report, the National Audit Office report on progress being made to net zero 2050, they cited that as A, the current problem, and B, the biggest opportunity about how we join up our thinking and take a more portfolio approach so that projects can benefit from, if you like, neighbouring or adjacent or related projects. So coming back to the specific question around the the accountability of what comes after the project. So there's several there. So there are some initiatives such as responsible project management. So it's out of, I think, Bournemouth University, where they're trying to recast our thinking of project life cycles. So the operations and also decommissioning considerations are factored into the early project thinking. We're also seeing some changes in government in terms of Green Book, in terms of how to evaluate, or the sort of project appraisal process in relation to carbon. And that's beyond just the performance of the project, but including the performance of what comes after the project. But there are some challenges. I think that the challenges around reporting is that until recently, there's been a wide range of interpretations in terms of how to report progress towards net zero. That is narrowing, and also the extent to which you report your own activities or your indirect activities. So those, I mentioned the ESG objectives earlier, how far down to your supply chain do you go in terms of the overall impact of your activities? So there's still work to do on that, but as they seeing the changes that have been put in place through things like Green Book, there's the Infrastructure and Projects Authority have also got their route map being refreshed, and I know that there's thinking there about longer term impacts, but also the improvement in reporting. So I think all these things collectively are making that better. Still a long way to go.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Andy. That's fantastic answer.
If I can add something to that.
Yeah, of course.
Gareth.
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, this is perhaps more looking ahead, but there are now one or two small companies out there who are helping to develop helping companies develop ESG reports, because we used to call these corporate social responsibility reports. Using methods that are based on blockchain techniques to provide an additional layer of perhaps reliability, and to prevent companies just saying what might not quite be evidenced by fact. And in terms of looking at overall outcomes of projects, we're now seeing the development of some integrated value techniques, which are attempting to, or which set out to look at how an individual project might be affecting a national attempt to attain the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. I mean, that's really looking back at the famed three-legged stool of environment, social, and economics. So those latter ones are in relatively early days, but I think they're showing promise of where things might go.
Yeah, super. Thank you, Tim. So there's another question from Warren, but I'm just, before I come to that, there's a question that I was going to ask, which a couple of the speakers, 3 or 4 in fact, mentioned culture and organizational culture, and the sort of the role between, I think there's 3 things here really. There's that organizational culture and perspective. There's also as Donny has outlined, this kind of global challenge that we're all facing, climate and nature emergencies, and then there's data and analytics, and so I guess a question, if I could probably come to Donny in the first instance, and then Grant as well, and perhaps Sue from a skills perspective, to just how is it that we can start to make better use of data and analytics, both to serve these very sort of grand ideas and ambitions, as well as for organisations to be embedding it and making changes happen?
Thanks, Gareth. I won't go too broad with it because it's I'm sure, look, everyone, a topic I could talk about all day, but I think specifically about what we're planning with this carbon self-assessment, it is actually to identify how people perceive it within their organisation. So how supportive do they believe their organisation is in this? So at the bottom level. So one of the things I never mentioned in it is although it sounds like a very individually focused initiative, there is an opportunity, as you know, Gareth, because we've talked about this over the last month or so, to make it an initiative within an organisation. And imagine a whole group of people within a single organisation completed the self-evaluation, and they were culturally, it showed there is not a lot of discussion about this. It's not one of our values, or it is. So that's the initiative itself will provide data to individuals, but also potentially organisations, to see how aligned or not they are around dealing with culture, the climate. At that, I'll leave it. That's enough for me.
Yeah, super, Donny. No, that's great. Thank you. And so, Grant, if I come to you in relation to the data access workstream, what's that kind of, how does culture fit into that?
A huge part, Gareth. I mean, what we've been debating and discussing, and I'll pick on the construction industry to start with, because obviously we've also been, Mark mentioned it earlier, but the Construction Data Trust, which I chair, has been making some significant progress in the last few months. And I think the construction industry has always been, it's quite a collaborative industry. You know, we work in supply chains, we work on projects that are very collaborative, and actually increasingly there are a number of cross-sector groups or cross industry groups working, collaborative groups working across the industry, trying to focus on particular things. And Mark mentioned the Get It Right initiative, there's Build UK, there's other organisations, but what none of them, very few of these groups have actually been able to do is get to true collaboration with data, with evidence, actually evidence-backed collaboration. But we've seen a real about turn in the last few months of people recognising the language of data and data analytics, and starting to recognise data having value to them as organisations, and consequently having value to them in that knowledge exchange and in that collaborative environment. So we're starting to get a real upsurge of activity, which is telling me that culturally organisations who were always willing to collaborate on solving problems in safety or quality or sustainability are now recognising that in order to do proper collaboration, we need to open up some of our data without jeopardising our commercial positions or our security provisions or any of those things. There's operational data which, when used collaboratively, can really unlock some of the problems that these organisations are trying to solve.
Yeah, absolutely. Super, thanks, Grant. Sue, if I come to you next, and the sort of the link between skills and culture, is that something that you've been sort of thinking about in your work stream? I think you're on mute, Sue.
I got the double mute failure.
Yeah.
Had to be me, didn't it? So I think from our perspective, it's something that's come up quite topically. Recognising that the understanding of data has got to sit at every level within the organisation. And I think as we've alluded to through this, when we start to ask questions around, the availability of the data and information, what you can start to see is actually the structure that we've set up around the work streams. It ties back to the questions are getting asked. The understanding therefore needs to be around what data structures do we need to have in place across our projects, our programs, our organisations, and therefore that lends itself naturally to the fact that actually we've got to have the right people with the right skills in place that know how to effectively mine that data. What are the things that we need to get out? What are the measures, the metrics, etc., that we've got to capture? And therefore we've got to upskill effectively the whole community. And so when I talk about kind of data culture, data literacy, data skills, then actually the correlation between all of them is quite strong. And has to sit across the pyramid effectively of the organisation. So very much entwined in terms of the thinking.
Super, thanks, Sue. And Joe, did you want to come in as well on this?
Yeah, thanks so much. On the, I think that the topics in the debate is very interesting, and the Environment Agency, and maybe picking up some of Warren's question, is we've actually set our chair and our chief exec have set a very bold commitment for us to be net zero carbon by 2030. And so that does require real collaboration and real trust. And so our commercial arrangements have for this, in our new collaborative commercial arrangements, have been built on a collaborative arrangement. But that's not easy. I think, as Grant was saying, it's not straightforward. There are cultural and behavioural barriers that we, as human beings, have to get through. And actually, recently, we've carried out a large study across our delivery partners and organisation around with behavioural psychologists to really understand some of the things that get in our way and how we unlock them. And again, that might be a really interesting insights to bring to this space. And the other part I'd ask everyone on this call, if you haven't already, is to read the output of the Dasgupta review, The Economics of Biodiversity, because there is a climate emergency, but there is a nature emergency. And as we're doing this fantastic work, it's always that dilemma, isn't it? I think, do you focus on one thing well? That tends to be my preference. But time is against us. So how do we keep the economics of biodiversity also at the heart of everything we do as we're reducing carbon? Thank you.
Yeah, super. Thanks, Joe. And I think that's a really important thing that we're all wrestling with on the task force and beyond is how we do start to balance. I mean, all of these different aspects that need to be moved forward. I think Martin had a question for Mark. Is that for Mark Coates, Martin, about the well-occupied space? Yeah, with lots going on. So what's your take on some of the key priorities, without sort of tripping over what everyone else is doing?
Hi, Gareth. The aspect of what the next steps are on the back of the paper. For me, I would definitely say it's the leadership, and so leadership has to come from the clients. And if you want to go to the nth degree on some of the work I've done, I'm actually working on now. I'm working a substantial amount with banks, insurances, and investment companies, because they're being audited on where their loans are going. You can see in the FT and many other publications about how they're being penalised by their own investors. So my concern is when these investors get together and say, we want you to invest in X, Y, Z, and we want to see this data, construction industry will be caught slightly on the hop, because we may have gone down a different route of providing data, where we need to sort of get this clear leadership from the asset owners and the organisations such as MPA to say, right, okay, that's what they're thinking. Mr. Clienty, do you have this understand what the process is, what you're going to be asked to do, and then the rest of the chain follows on. So, people like yourself, Gareth, at SRM can go, right, okay, we're giving you this. And I think one of the pages of the paper, there's a very interesting diagram that I came up with. And I came up with it at the beginning of 2020. And I've actually had 3 or 4 clients saying, can I borrow it already? It's the change. And I think it's that going from the value of 2020 just providing insight, complex project, or insight design, maybe complex project, to now the management afterwards, this extending the relationship. And the phrase I've been using is X plus 10 or X plus 20. X is the project period, and then it's that 10 or 20 year lifespan afterwards, managing your data, because that gives you amazing insights to actually then go and build the next project.
Yeah, absolutely.
Had we had all this technology before COVID arrived, just think of the resilience we would have been able to do in COVID. So it's that sort of leadership, client level, interacting with the banks becomes really, really effective for us to not waste time or effort or money. Yeah,
super. And I think, as Andy's pointing out, that links back to the question that Ezra had asked earlier about the operation of assets. I'm conscious of the time and don't want to keep you too much longer. I think Warren had specifically asked about how government, treasury, and the IPA fit in to these conversations. Just to answer that very quickly, we've got the IPA that sit in on the task force meetings that we have on a monthly basis, and we're very closely linked to them. I wasn't going to dwell on that because I think Joe's already articulated, and we've had that picked up in many of the other answers, that it is a group, well, lots and lots of different parts of government that we're in conversation with. So I'm conscious that with only a couple of minutes left, I'll pass over to Tim to have the final word. And Tim, you're muted.
Thank you, Gareth. A number of people say it's better that way. Can I ask, please, either Andy or Mark, the Power of Data report, is that available and accessible?
Yes, so that's on the MPA website and also on the Task Force website. Okay,
thank you very much. And just to follow the last point Gareth was making, I mean, those are formal links with government, but a number of us on the task force are engaged with a number of different government activities. So I think it was Andy who mentioned a little while ago that the IPA project initiation route map is currently being refreshed. Well, a number of the people on the task force are involved in one way or another in that initiative itself, etc. Thanks. Could you go back 2 slides, please? Thank you. We welcome feedback. If you can use a QR reader on the black blob there, it does work. I tried it just before we met. It will take you to a feedback form, and all feedback is very welcome, please. 2 slides forward. Right, well, thank you for listening, everyone, and for your questions. Thank you to the presenters and indeed the rest of our colleagues on the task force for the work you're doing. You can keep up to date with us by looking at or by visiting the PDA taskforce.com site. The slides will be made available, and maybe the recording as well. Either Yoshi or Martin, could you let me know roughly when that might be?
2 days, hopefully.
2 days, right?
Yep.
So you can look on the website and find it all there. As I say, we welcome your comments. Please do take the opportunity to join with us. This really is a case of many hands making light work, however you interpret that. And apart from that, I think it's time to draw stumps on this, and we'll be in touch the next time we feel we're able and ready and capable to provide a general summary, as we've done today. Meanwhile, these various initiatives through the 6 work streams will be beavering along hard, and there is every opportunity to get involved with one or more of those as well.